The steel knew who was holding it. And if the wrong blood drew it from the scabbard, the blade didn't just fail, it punished them. That wasn't a legend, wasn't a rumor whispered by old maesters trying to sound important. It was a standard feature, forged into every weapon by every Dragonlord family across 5,000 years of production. And every one of those features went silent on the same day. By the end of this video, you'll understand what really died inside every Valyrian steel blade when the doom fell, and why what Westeros carries now are the most beautiful corpses in the known world. In part 2, we went inside the dragon forges and saw how the steel was made. Volcanic heat, embermore dragon fire, blood sacrifice, and divine consecration. Each family's blade was bound to a specific god. That consecration wasn't symbolic, it was functional. Each god's blessing granted a different enchantment, a living property woven into the metal itself, sustained by the ongoing connection between the blade and the forge where it was born. And the 40 families guarded their enchantments more fiercely than they guarded their dragons. Because in a civilization where every Dragonlord house carried Valyrian steel, the enchantment was the edge. The base metal made you dangerous. The enchantment made you dominant. Let's start with the war enchantments, the ones designed to end fights before they began. Houses aligned with Vhagar, the Bronze Thunder, goddess of war drill and storm discipline, forged blades that erupted in dragonflame the instant they cleared the scabbard. Not wildfire, not oil-soaked tricks like Thoros of Myr bought from Tobo Mott's shop. True dragonfire, sealed into the metal itself, igniting on contact with open air. Imagine drawing your sword and watching the blade wreath itself in flames that burned hot enough to soften castle-forged steel. Your opponent's weapon would warp and bend the first time it parried yours. House Morainar, the siege lords, who bred the great colossi, went further. Their blades carried what later texts call the furnace curse. On contact with enemy steel, the Morainar blade would transfer heat, superheating the opposing weapon until the wielder's grip blistered and the metal became impossible to hold. You didn't have to outfight a Morainar swordsman. You had to survive the first clash. Most couldn't. The Stormclaw families, houses Aelindar and their allies, who bred all-weather assault dragons, forged blades that channeled static charge during storms. In fair weather, merely perfect swords, but in rain, in thunder, in the electrical chaos of a Stormclaw's wake, those blades crackled with arcs of pale lightning that leapt from the edge to anything metal within arm's reach. Fighting a Stormclaw rider in a storm was suicide before the sword was even drawn. And House Aelores, the Sky Lords who bred the fastest Sky Shriekers in the Freehold, enchanted their blades to lose weight at altitude. On the ground, a fine weapon. At 10,000 feet, in a screaming dive between dragons, the blade was so light it moved faster than thought. Sky duels were decided in fractions of a second, and the Aelores' enchantment gave their riders an edge no amount of training could overcome. But the war enchantments were the loud ones, the ones enemies could see and brace for. The truly dangerous magic was quiet. House Rhaemion, the Forge Kings of Oros who bred the Embermaws, didn't waste enchantments on combat theatrics. Their blades were forged to sense other Valyrian steel. When a Rhaemion weapon came within 100 paces of another house's blade, it would hum, a low, resonant vibration that the wielder felt in their bones. This wasn't decoration. It was an arms detection system, in a world where a single Valyrian blade could decide a battle. Knowing that your enemy carried one, before you could see it, was the difference between ambush and survival. House Baeleris, the great wave runner breeders who dominated Valyrian naval power, enchanted their steel to glow a deep, bioluminescent blue in darkness. Not a torch, not a beacon, a soft, cold light that intensified in the presence of hostile sorcery. Sailors called them tide lights. A Baeleris captain walking the deck of his warship at midnight could tell if blood mages on an enemy vessel were working spells against his fleet, because his sword would start glowing brighter the closer the magic came. And then there were the Bloodline locks. This is where it gets unsettling. The oldest and most paranoid families forged protections directly into their steel that punished anyone outside the bloodline for touching it. House Khaedoris, The secretive mountain riders, enchanted blades that would grow physically heavier in unauthorized hands, not symbolically heavier, physically heavier. A sword that felt like air to a Cadoris would feel like lead to a thief. The longer you held it, the worse it got, until the blade was too heavy to lift. Others went darker, blades that induced nightmares in non-consecrated wielders. You could carry the sword by day and fight beautifully with it, but every night you'd dream of the 14 flames, of volcanic chambers filled with screaming, of blood hitting molten metal, of something watching you from inside the fire. The dreams would worsen over weeks until the wielder either returned the blade or went mad. Some weapons simply wouldn't cut for the wrong bloodline. The edge was there, the steel was sharp, but against living flesh, a stolen blade would slide without breaking skin, as if the metal recognized that the hand guiding it had no right to draw blood with it. And the strangest enchantment of all, blades that wept. Cold condensation forming on the steel like sweat whenever the weapon was pointed toward Valyria, as if the metal itself was grieving for the forges it was born in. 400 years later, no blade does this anymore. But the question is, did it stop because the enchantment died, or because the blade finally finished mourning? Now think about what hangs on the walls of Westerosi great halls. Ice, once possibly a blade that blazed with oath fire when its true family spoke their words in High Valyrian. Now, just silent steel that Ned Stark used to take heads. And when Tywin Lannister had it reforged, the metal fought back, darkening into gray and red, despite Tobo Mott's best efforts to dye it crimson. Even dead, even stripped of every enchantment, the steel remembered it wasn't Lannister property. It resisted. Longclaw, re-hilted with a wolf head pommel that has nothing to do with the family that forged it. Whatever enchantment it carried is long gone. But when Jon Snow swings it against the dead, against whites and White Walkers, does the steel react because Valyrian steel is inherently magical? Or because somewhere deep inside the metal, the ghost of an enchantment stirs when it encounters exactly the kind of enemy it was forged to destroy? Every enchantment collapsed when the fire mages died and the 14 flames erupted. The connection between blade and volcano, between weapon and god, severed in one catastrophic day. What survived are extraordinary bones, but they were just bones. And that raises the final question of this series. If the enchantments were powered by the forges, and the forges were held stable by fire mages, who killed the fire mages, and why? The answer is the darkest truth in the history of the Freehold. I'm your maester at the Black Dread. Part 4 closes the Before Valyrian Steel series, and it will ruin the doom for you forever. Subscribe. The dead forges are still listening.